Welcome to the Stranger Than Fiction podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Patrick Meekin. I'm the author of the True Spiritual Warfare books, Nightmare in Holmes County and 225th Street. Both books take a biblical approach to real-life haunting situations that I encountered in two consecutive yet unrelated haunted houses. Both books not only tell the terrifying details of my experiences in those houses and the history of those houses and those locations, but they also contain lots of scripture to explain spiritual warfare and explain how anyone can have victory over the spirits of darkness and the kingdom of darkness in Jesus' name. Both books are available as Kindle downloads, paperback, or audiobooks at Amazon.com. In honor of the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination, tonight we will be reinvestigating the JFK assassination, and I believe I will be proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Warren Commission findings were completely flawed, completely false, and I believe I will be identifying who the real assassins were, at least two of the real shooters. Neither one was Lee Harvey Oswald. And I will be explaining what groups were behind the assassination as well. And I will be going into great detail. And this information was obtained over many years of researching the JFK assassination through many sources, including what will be one of the star witnesses for the program tonight, a man named James E. Files. His real name is James Sutton. It was legally changed to James Files. And he has confessed to being the shooter behind the fence on the Grassy knoll. And he has obviously not been prosecuted for that. He was a mafia hitman. He did jobs for the mafia. He was also a CIA operative. And he cannot be prosecuted for this assassination because the government has been so hell-bent on blaming the assassination on Lee Harvey Oswald and making him out to be the lone shooter. So they cannot go back on everything they've supposedly proven and now go after someone else. But I will be connecting the dots between the mob and the CIA and our own government, and I will be identifying who all was really involved in the plot, in the conspiracy to assassinate John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So as many of you know, the assassination did occur on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, and it happened in Dealey Plaza, and I will be looking at, again, who was involved, where they were positioned in the plaza, and who took the fatal head wound. But I want to start at the beginning. As I have already identified, a man named James Files has come forward and stated that he was the shooter behind the barricade fence, as he put it, on the Grassy knoll. Files was a mafia hitman He had been hired. He had been in the military. He was in the 82nd Airborne. He got himself in trouble in the military and was discharged, and was immediately contacted by a man named David Atlee Phillips, who is known to be a man who worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, because Files was known to be a very good shot and very good with headshots in battle. That is why the CIA was interested in him. He was also recruited to be a driver for a mafia mobster known as Charles Nicoletti. Now, Charles Nicoletti answered to another mobster named Johnny Roselli. And Johnny Roselli answered to who was basically the godfather of the Chicago mafia family, a man by the name of Sam Giancano. So according to Files, Charles Nicoletti contacted him in 1963, prior to November 22nd, and told him that they were going to do a hit on his buddy, which he was being sarcastic because Files did not like JFK, because Files had helped train the men who were involved in the Bay of Pigs, and he felt that Kennedy had betrayed all of them, when in reality the CIA is who betrayed them. The CIA went ahead and did things without JFK's approval, and which led to those men being captured and tortured and everything else, just completely slaughtered. But in Files' view, JFK was the person in the wrong, so he was more than happy to go along with a hit on JFK. Now, at this point, Nicoletti only wanted Files involved to assist and to do some specific jobs. Number one being the driver, because he was a driver for Nicoletti, but also to basically scope out the area and get some weapons ready, scope out the area, and find out where he felt the best places would be to pull off the hit. So they sent Files to Dallas the week prior to the assassination, and he stayed in a hotel in Mesquite, Texas. And it was supposed to be completely top secret that he was there, but one night he had a knock on his door, and he answered the door, and standing there was Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, he knew Lee Oswald already because both of them were CIA operatives. Both of them had the same controller, which was David Atlee Phillips. Now, in these days, in the modern times, that controller would be called a handler. That means that's the person for the CIA who is responsible for overseeing the operatives. And Files stated that him and Oswald were both CIA operatives, and they had done a job previously together. I believe it was transporting ammunition or something like that, or weapons, and that they did know each other. But Files could not understand how Oswald could have known that he was there, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And Oswald stated that he was told to just come and help him with anything he needed help with. So Files did confirm that Oswald had been sent by David Atlee Phillips, who again was a CIA member who was over both Files and Lee Harvey Oswald. So throughout that week and those days prior to the assassination, Oswald simply did whatever Files asked him to do, which included just driving him around. And a lot of people will say Oswald could not drive. That is not true, according to Files. He said Oswald did know how to drive, and he drove them around the area. even through Dealey Plaza. And, as Files scoped everything out, Files said he never discussed with Oswald in any way what he was actually working on. So he said he had never discussed the assassination plot or anything with Oswald. But he then told Oswald that he needed to sight in some guns. So Oswald took him to a location outside of Mesquite, Texas, where he sighted in the weapon which ended up being used in the assassination, according to Files, which was a Remington Fireball. Now, a Remington Fireball, most people think hadn't been released yet, but it had, and it had been a prototype for several years, which the Mafia had gotten their hands on that gun, and they had used it in some other hits, some lower profile hits. It was a very accurate gun. It was a gun they liked for hits because it was set up in many ways like a rifle, but could be held like a pistol, and it was very accurate. And it had a bolt action, like, for instance, what you would think most rifles would have, but yet it did not have a stock that butted up into your shoulder. It had a hand grip like a pistol. And Files had also, prior to that, had, I believe it was 6 special load bullets made for that gun. Now, a special load was a bullet that he had modified, so there was a hole drilled in the lead projectile, and the lead had mercury put into the lead, into the hole, and then it was sealed over with wax. And when that bullet hit, it would explode. So he went with Oswald. Oswald took him to a deserted location very discreetly, and he sighted in the Fireball, and I'm assuming some other rifles as well. But as he was shooting and sighting in the gun, he said, "You never leave your shell casings behind." So he was like, "Lee, pick up those shell casings for me, please. We can't leave them here." So as he was shooting, Lee Oswald was picking up the shell casings and holding them in his hand. After the guns were sighted in, they parted ways. Oswald dropped him back off, and they parted ways. On Friday morning, November 22nd, 1963, according to Files, Charles Nicoletti informed him that he needed him to be one of the shooters. And he said, I believe it was Johnny Rossetti did not want to be involved at that point because the CIA had called the hit off, and they had sent in an abort team to abort the hit. Yet the mob said, "We don't take orders from the CIA. We only take orders from basically Sam Giancana. So we didn't get those orders from Sam Giancana, so we're not listening to the CIA, and we're going through with the hit." So Files agreed to be one of the shooters, and he told Nicoletti that he believed the best place for him to shoot from was the stockade fence on the hill, which was known later as the Grassy knoll. And he said, "I feel like I can shoot from behind that fence. It'll be a close shot. Anyone who sees me up there will think I'm a railroad worker because the railroad runs behind there. So it's a perfect cover for me." He said, "There's a tree that'll overhang, so I can do it without being detected." And Files stated that Nicoletti said, "Well, what weapon are you going to use?" And he said, "I'm going to use the Fireball." And he said, "Why are you using that? It only has one shot." Because it was a single shot gun with a bolt action. And Files stated that he believed that was the proper gun because he was only going to get one shot anyway. And he was shooting from the front, and they really wanted all the shots to come from the rear. And he was only to shoot in the worst case scenario that no one had already had a deadly hit on Kennedy. So he was only supposed to take a shot if it was absolutely necessary. So at that point, Nicoletti agreed. That made sense. And he said, well, where do you think I should shoot from? And Files stated the Daltex building. He said, I think that's the perfect location. And Files stated that he believed that Nicoletti had already also come to that conclusion. And he said, yeah, I agree. And they had already had it arranged for Nicoletti to be let. And apparently, originally, Johnny Roselli also was going to be shooting from there, but it had been arranged for them to be let into the Daltex building and into specific areas where they could easily shoot. So there was no shooter from the book depository. As they were about to part ways, Files then told Nicoletti that he did foresee a potential problem. And Nicoletti asked him what that problem was, and he said, Lee Oswald. Now, keep in mind, Files knew Lee Oswald through the CIA and David Atlee Phillips, who was the handler or controller of both of them. He did not know Oswald through the mafia. So Nicoletti said, I have no idea who Lee Oswald is. I never heard of him. And he said, so he explained the situation and said that David Atlee Phillips had Oswald show him around. And he said, I am going to be involved in this now. And Oswald knows that I was here. He knows, I sighted in the guns. He knows all these things. So he could potentially be a problem. And to that, Charles Nicoletti stated, I'll take care of it. They then parted ways, and Nicoletti made his way to the Daltex building, and Files eventually made his way to the Grassy knoll and positioned himself behind what we know now as the picket fence or the stockade fence, as he called it at that time. He had the fireball in a small briefcase. The gun was small, so it could be hid very easily. He had worn a reversible coat, so he had the option of turning his coat inside out to change his appearance when necessary. He did have a hat with him, and he had a .45 pistol also underneath his coat. He then, through the scope, viewed the area. He identified multiple people that he saw there that he knew were involved, including Jack Ruby, who Files knew because Ruby had provided false identification, CIA identification or Secret Service identification to one of the mafia people, which I believe was Johnny Roselli, and that was all done at a small restaurant or a coffee shop in Dallas. And Files had stood by, as being the driver, he had stood by and basically provided cover for the Johnny Roselli in case something went wrong in the restaurant. So he knew who Jack Ruby was, even though he had not actually met him himself. He saw multiple people there involved that he knew were mafia people as well. And eventually he heard the crowd noise increase, and he saw the presidential motorcade approaching. He raised the Remington fireball and was looking through the scope. He said with the scope he was using, it was a very easy shot, even though the vehicle would be moving. He stated that looking through the sight, he was aiming for JFK's right eye, which for him would have been the left side of JFK's head because he's facing him. He said he knew there were shots ringing out, and he saw the body lurch, but as far as he could tell, there had been no deadly headshot, so he considered every shot that had been fired so far a miss. He stated that he was aiming for the right eyeball, And at the same second that he squeezed the trigger, the head started to come forward, and therefore he hit Kennedy in the temple, like just behind the hairline, basically, and his head exploded because of the mercury special load bullet that was used. He stated that he did state that the motorcade had slowed drastically down, which is very strange, because once shots were fired, the protocol should have been for the motorcade to speed away, but it didn't. It slowed down almost to a stop before he took the fatal headshot. He also stated that he does believe that Charles Nicoletti finally had a headshot from the rear a split second before he pulled the trigger, which caused the head to start to come forward, which is why he hit Kennedy in the temple instead of the eye. Nevertheless, he said through the scope he could see, the head literally explode. He then ducked down behind the fence, took the shell casing out of the gun, bit down on it, leaving his teeth marks in the shell casing, put the gun back in the case, put the shell casing with his teeth marks on a crossbeam of the stockade fence, reversed his jacket, put on his hat, and began walking to where he knew the car would be parked. Once he said he did see a police officer come running up the hill. He dumped his motorcycle and began running up the hill with his gun out. But two other men on the other side of the fence stopped the police officer and showed him credentials and basically turned him away. So he said, with the 45 under my coat, I would have shot if I needed to, but I made my way back to the car. He stated that when he got in the car, Charles Nicoletti and Johnny Roselli were already in the car. He got in the driver's seat. They put the guns in special compartments, and he drove away. He stated that Charles Nicoletti asked him if he thought maybe he jumped the gun and, got too excited and shot unnecessarily. And he stated, no, I was losing my field of fire, and I didn't want to hit Jackie, so that's why I took the shot when I did. As far as I could tell, no one was hitting him in the head. So Charles Nicoletti was satisfied with that answer. James Files then dropped Nicoletti and Roselli off at another location near a gas station where another car was parked, and he then made his way back to his hotel room where he put heated wax on he showered and put heated wax on his face, and then peeled it off to remove any nitrates in his skin from firing the gun. He then waited. He stated that later that evening he heard a knock at his door. Again, no one was supposed to know he was there. And a guy that he knew he would not identify, but this individual stated to Files that he had a problem. He said he missed Oswald and he had to burn a cop, meaning he killed a cop. And Files said, well, you did what you had to do. And the individual wanted Files to get rid of a gun for him. And Files sent him on his way and said, you deal with your own issues. I'm not helping you with that. I have to deal with my own stuff. So the individual left. So whoever this individual is, who Files, to my knowledge, has not yet identified because he's probably still alive, is the individual who shot J.D. Tippit. And he was supposed to take out Lee Harvey Oswald to shut him up because Oswald would have been able to pin Files to the assassination. So when Nicoletti had told Files earlier that they would take care of the Oswald problem, so to speak, they sent this individual to take out Oswald, and Oswald had gotten basically gotten home and left to go to the theater, which I believe he was going to meet David Atlee Phillips. But anyway, this individual missed Oswald. He did not get there in time. And then he was stopped by a police officer, which was J.D. Tippit, so he killed him. Files then stated that later he made his way back to Chicago, and he was later paid by Charles Nicoletti $30,000 for the hit on JFK. And when he was given the money, he said, what is this for? And Nicoletti said, for the job in Dallas. He said it was $30,000 in cash. So as you go back through, I believe that Files is telling the truth. Number one, he knew all the names of the mafia, godfathers and the mafia hitmen. He knew these people. Now, all these names I've said tonight are people who were real people, really involved with the mafia for a fact. It's not like just made up names that sound like mafia names. These are real individuals. And interestingly enough, each of those individuals was later killed also. Nicoletti was murdered in Chicago in 1977 on March 29th, when he was due to testify to the House Select Committee on Assassinations. So the House Select Committee on Assassinations was looking into the CIA and hits that they had done. Nicoletti was murdered, shot, I believe, 3 times in the head in his car outside of a restaurant in Chicago to stop him from testifying. I had also mentioned Sam Giancana, who was murdered in 1975, just days before he was to testify to the Committee on Assassinations. Files later stated that he believes Johnny Roselli is who the mafia sent to kill Giancana to stop him from testifying, because Files was at the airport for another reason, picking up someone else. And on the night that Giancana was murdered, and he saw Johnny Roselli in the airport, he had just flown into Chicago. He had another individual with him. So he could put Roselli, in the area the night that Giancana was murdered. Another interesting detail is that Giancana was murdered in his own house, and he had an area in his basement after some of his family members had gone to bed where he slept, and he had an area where he was fixing some food, like a midnight snack or whatever, and someone knocked on the door, and it was someone he knew. And he let them in and was preparing food for both of them. And while he was preparing the food, that individual shot him, and then shot him multiple times in the roof of the mouth to kill him, which was a sign it was a mafia hit. So that does all point to it being Johnny Roselli who killed Sam Giancana to shut him up. Interestingly enough, that happened in 1975. On August 7th, 1976, Roselli, who had testified once already to this House Select Committee on Assassinations, was called to testify again, but he was unable to because he was murdered. He went missing and was then later found dismembered in a 55-gallon barrel in Dumfoundling Bay after he had testified once already. So these individuals that Files clearly really did know all are really connected to these, the assassination of real people that were very dirty, who were going to be called on for testimony before the government about CIA hits and things of that nature. So it definitely does seem that is very believable. Now, later, I stated that previously that James Files stated that his handler for the CIA, or his controller for the CIA, was David Atlee Phillips. And he said Phillips was also Lee Harvey Oswald's controller or handler. David Atlee Phillips is a real person, is confirmed to have worked for the CIA. After he left the CIA, he was very pro-CIA, testified on behalf of the CIA to legitimize them repeatedly before his death in 1988. So it does very much appear that there is a connection between the CIA and the Chicago Mafia to kill John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, there are some other people we're going to look at as well, besides Lee Harvey Oswald, who we are going to take another look at as well. So as we take a little bit closer look at Lee Harvey Oswald, Oswald had been in the military. He is now confirmed to have been a CIA operative. That's not conspiracy theory. It is proven fact. It is documented. It is well known that Lee Harvey Oswald was, in fact, a CIA operative. So the deal that he basically, lived on next to nothing and worked at the book depository, all of that was a cover. He was involved in a lot of other things. If you've ever wondered why they had video of him passing out brochures and flyers in, I believe it was in New Orleans, for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which he allegedly was the head of in that area. The real reason for that was he was working for the CIA. Obviously, if he's doing something undercover, he's going to appear to be someone on the other side. He was passing out the brochures, and anyone who took the brochures and didn't throw them away was then followed because they believed they were people coming in that were spies. So that was the whole reason he was involved in that. So if you ever wonder why there's video of him doing all these things, that is why. I also believe this was all part of something that they were going to use later to set him up. But as most people recall, according to the Warren Commission and the official narrative of the Kennedy assassination, Oswald went to work the morning of the assassination with supposedly a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, bolt-action rifle, under his arm that he was pretending was curtain rods. However, the gentleman who drove him to work stated that the whole box that they were supposedly in, or the package, was 2.5 feet long, nowhere near the length of that rifle. And then he allegedly went to the 6th floor of the book depository and waited for the presidential motorcade to pass, and then fired off 3 shots very quickly with a, supposedly a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, and hit Kennedy twice, missed once, and of course the magic bullet was one of the 2 that hit Kennedy. And the magic bullet allegedly went through Kennedy, bounced around through Kennedy, exited Kennedy's body, went into Conley, who was sitting in a jump seat in the limousine in front of Kennedy, went through his body, bounced around, bounced off some ribs, went through his wrist, shattered his wrist, and then went through his leg, and then was later found, after it had allegedly fallen out of Conley onto a stretcher in the hospital. It was found in pristine condition. Even though it had gone through 2 bodies, came in contact with multiple bones, it was still in pristine condition. After the shooting had occurred, the whole reason, allegedly, that Oswald became a suspect was because a police officer allegedly heard the gunshots and saw pigeons fly off the top of the book depository. So he thought that meant that someone definitely was shot from inside the book depository. So he stormed the building, got the manager. When they hit the second floor, they ran right into a lounge where Lee Harvey Oswald was calmly sitting, drinking a bottle of Coke, I believe it was, and with two of his coworkers, very calmly. And the manager identified who they were and that, they were employees of the book depository. And shortly thereafter, Oswald left. And at that point, later they claimed they found a Mannlicher Carcano rifle and spent shell casings in the quote-unquote sniper's nest in the 6th floor of the book depository. However, for Oswald to have fired those shots, number one, it is impossible to fire those shots at a moving vehicle with that gun. It's impossible. It's not even possible to do it. The guns are notorious for jamming. The sights were in the scope and everything was messed up on the gun that they claimed was the gun that Oswald used. It could not possibly have fired the shots. There was no palm print, no fingerprints on the gun from Oswald at that point. When they first found the gun, there was nothing. But while they were doing that, Oswald, who obviously being a CIA member knew that something was up, he left. There's different stories on how he arrived home. Some are that he took a bus. Some are that Ruth Payne, who owned the boarding house where he lived, so he could work at the book depository, that she picked him up. There were witnesses who claimed that they saw her pick him up in her car, but they took him, or he arrived back at her house. He allegedly went in, put on a sweater, and got a pistol, and then left, and made his way in very quick order to the Texas Theater, where he, I believe, was waiting to meet his controller, which was David Atlee Phillips. That's where he had been told to go to meet him. And in reality, he was being set up. They then went there. They claimed that he had killed a cop. They arrested him. And while under arrest, he said he had never been told what he was under arrest for. And that when they said he shot the president, he said he didn't shoot anyone. He said he hadn't shot anyone. And again, he began saying that I'm just a patsy, which is a mafia term for a fall guy. He was then later gunned down by Jack Ruby, who was a nightclub owner, a local nightclub owner. He was gunned down while being transferred inside the police department. So how he got, anyone could get that close to the suspect who allegedly had just murdered the president and a cop is very suspicious in and of itself. So that's the basic story on Oswald. According to the Warren Commission, that's what they claim he did. However, there are multiple accounts that disprove this. One very convincing account comes from a lady who claims to have been Lee Harvey Oswald's mistress, and her name is Judith Very Baker. Mrs. Baker is still alive to this day. She claims that she got to know Oswald during the year previous to the assassination in 1963, previous to the assassination, and that they were involved in an affair. And she stated that the whole way they got to know each other was both of them were part of a program to assassinate not JFK, but Fidel Castro. And they were working on different ways of creating cancer, like very, very aggressive cancer, that then Oswald would be transporting to Cuba and giving to other people who would get it to Fidel Castro without his knowledge. He would then, I believe it was going to be put in his cigarettes. It was going to be administered to him without his knowledge, and then he would die of cancer. And she stated that Oswald had, in fact, infiltrated a group that was a cell who was planning on assassinating JFK. And according to Judith Baker, a few weeks before the assassination occurred, Oswald had uncovered that this terrorist cell was going to assassinate Kennedy on a trip to Chicago. And Oswald tipped off the Secret Service that there was going to be a hit on the president in Chicago, so Kennedy did not go to Chicago, and they had to replan the assassination attempt. Now, as crazy as that sounds, her story is corroborated by a Secret Service agent who was appointed by JFK by the name of Agent Abraham Bolden. Abraham Bolden was the first black Secret Service agent. He was appointed by JFK. He was known to be a man of integrity, did things by the book, did not tolerate other Secret Service agents who basically screwed around, did not do their jobs, did not follow through, did not follow policy. So Bolden was known for being a man of integrity. And he stated that there was an attempt, or there was going to be an attempt on Kennedy in Chicago several weeks before the hit in Dallas, and that the Secret Service had been tipped off by a man named Lee that there was going to be an assassination attempt, so they had not gone to Chicago. Interestingly enough, as is the case with many credible witnesses involving the JFK assassination, Bolden was later wrongfully imprisoned and spent many years in prison. He was just recently pardoned by Joe Biden, but the man spent many years in prison even though he was a man of integrity, which is a complete disgrace. But Abraham Bolden did corroborate Judith Baker's claim that Oswald was not only patriotic, not only pro JFK, but that he had disrupted a terrorist plot to assassinate JFK in Chicago. Several days before the assassination, this was the last time that Oswald spoke to Baker on the phone, last time she ever spoke to him at all. And he told her that he believed that the terrorist cell that he had infiltrated suspected that he had tipped off the government. And he believed that they knew that he was basically a mole. And he told her that he said, "I do not believe I will get out of this alive." And he said, one thing's for sure, there's going to be one less gun pointed at JFK in Dallas, meaning he would not go along with any assassination attempt on JFK. So if they had tried to make him a shooter, he didn't go through with it, and he wouldn't go through with it. But he told her he believed that they were onto him, and he would not have anything to do with an assassination attempt on the president. And he said, "I do not believe I will make it out of this alive." And even though he had claimed previously to be agnostic, and at that time, Judith Baker had professed to be atheist, Lee Oswald asked Judith Baker to pray with him because he thought they were going to kill him. And she said, she did pray the Lord's Prayer with him over the phone. They both prayed it together over the phone. And then, a couple of days later is when he had allegedly assassinated Kennedy, and then within 48 hours of that, he was assassinated by Jack Ruby. Judith Very Baker has many many of her points that she makes have been corroborated, including the places where she and Oswald had fake jobs to cover up that they did work for the CIA. She has corroborated a lot of these, the points of this. Another point that she claimed, which was later corroborated by someone involved in the assassination on his deathbed, was that the assassination was known as the big event. That is what the people involved in the hit team were calling it. It was known as the big event. Now, she has stated this for many, many years. I believe clear back into the 1990s or earlier. But this was later corroborated by a man who was a CIA operative, confirmed to be a CIA operative, known as E. Howard Hunt. His confession is recorded on video. You can find it on YouTube. He says basically the same thing that she said. He said that the hit on JFK was known as the big event. So Judith Vary Baker is a very credible source. Now, another very credible source turned out to be a lady by the name of Madeline Brown, who was the mistress of Lyndon B. Johnson. It is believed that she has a child with Lyndon Johnson as well. But according to Madeline Brown, on November 21st, 1963, so the night before the assassination, there was a party at the home of a Texas billionaire named Clint Murchison Sr. And at that party, the party was a birthday party for J. Edgar Hoover. And it was at, again, Murchison's mansion outside of Dallas. And at approximately 9 o'clock in the evening, most of the men who were present went into a private room and closed the door, into a conference room in the mansion and closed the door and had a meeting. Present were not only LBJ, J. Edgar Hoover, E. Howard Hunt, but other, government people were also present. And after the meeting, when LBJ exited the room, he said to his mistress, quote, "After tomorrow, those expletive Kennedys will never embarrass me again. That's not a threat. It's a promise." Now, obviously, I'm not quoting the language he used. I used the word expletive in place of that. But according to Madeline Brown, when LBJ exited that private meeting, he was very angry. She said he was a very violent person, and he grabbed her by the arm and stated that in a very angry tone. She then stated that the following day he called her on the phone and was very much worked up again and stated the same thing, that, after that day, that he used bad language again. And she said he often referred to the Kennedys as the Irish Mafia. And he stated that they would not embarrass him again. And that's not a threat, it's a promise. So he said basically the same thing the following day. Now, interestingly enough, this in a very strange way implicates even a link to the Dallas Cowboys. And that stinks because I'm a Cowboys fan, but the reason this all links to the Cowboys is because Clint Murchison Sr. was the father of the original owner of the Dallas Cowboys, who was Clint Murchison Jr. So clearly, if that party was at his house and they discussed the assassination that was going to take place the following day, Clint Murchison Sr. was every bit involved in it and had knowledge of it. Now, Clint Murchison's Sr.'s money had come from basically big oil in Texas. Interestingly enough, Madeleine Brown also claimed that later she said to LBJ, this is a quote, "I asked him, Lyndon, you've got to tell me. You've got to talk to me. Were you involved in Kennedy's death?" Finally, he said, "You know the people that I know, the oil people and CIA, they did it." That's a quote. So again, another connection to very powerful people, very corrupt people, and our own government. Now, as far as the CIA was concerned, I think one reason they wanted Kennedy out was he basically wanted to get rid of the CIA. They had completely botched the Bay of Pigs. They went against him and did what they wanted. They did not listen to what he said and caused that whole fiasco. So he fired a guy named Allen Dulles, who was the head of the CIA. He fired him, and he was quoted as stating, "I will smash the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter them to the wind." Ironically, after the assassination of JFK, when the Warren Commission was created, Allen Dulles played a major role in the investigation of the JFK assassination, which clearly was botched and completely corrupt. They covered up evidence. They covered up witness statements, disregarded true witness statements to come to the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone shooter. Now, additionally, pretty much every doctor who was involved in the emergency room treatment of JFK disagreed with the autopsy photos. They believed those were not correct photos because the wounds did not match the wounds that they witnessed when they took care of him, trying to save his life at the hospital after the shooting. They all described massive gaping head wounds with large parts of the brain missing. A large part of the cerebellum fell out, the massive hole in the back of the head, while they were trying to determine what methods of treatment to use for him. I don't believe there's any of the doctors who were present, who have agreed with the supposed autopsy findings. They do not believe any of those pictures are legit, and the wounds that have been described by the government do not at all match with the wounds that they witnessed. Additionally, as I stated earlier, James Files had claimed that after he shot Kennedy, he removed the shell casing from the Remington Fireball, placed it in his mouth, bit down on the shell casing, and then left it on the crossbeam of the picket fence on the Grassy knoll. Files claimed that after he did hits for the mafia, he would leave calling cards, which the mafia frowned upon, but he continued doing it. And he stated that is why he left the shell casing. Is there any proof that what he was stating is true? Well, actually there is. In 1987, a man named Pete Rademacher searched the area behind the fence on the Grassy knoll and found a shell casing matching exactly what Files claimed to have used, and the shell casing did appear to have teeth marks in it. Apparently, at some point after Files had placed the shell casing on the fence, it had been knocked to the ground and had probably been stepped on and pushed down into the ground. And when it was found years later in 1987, the man was using a metal detector and dug the shell out of the ground. That shell was later examined by Dr. Paul G. Stimson, who confirmed that the shell did indeed have teeth marks. A letter stating this, signed by Paul G. Stimson, is included now in the video. As if that wasn't enough evidence, there's more evidence involving the alleged bullets. All along, one of the problems with the Warren report was that they claimed that there was what became known as the magic bullet, which had passed through Kennedy and into Conley, bounced off of multiple bones in both men, shattered bones, and then allegedly, supposedly rolled out of Conley's body on a stretcher in the hospital and was found to be in pristine condition and later confirmed to be the bullet that had done these magic tricks, which is 100% impossible. But the Warren Commission basically bet everything on that claim. Well, recently, in 2023, the Secret Service agent who was assigned to protecting Jackie Kennedy, his name was Paul Landis, confessed that he had found this pristine bullet in the back of the limousine after they removed Kennedy and took him into the hospital. Landis claims that he then removed that bullet, took it inside to give to one of his superiors, but in all of the confusion, he could not find anyone to give it to, and he placed it on an empty stretcher. So the bullet had never come out of Conley. It had never, magically passed through both bodies and then just magically fell out of Conley onto a stretcher and remained in pristine condition. Secret Service agent Paul Landis confessed that he had found that bullet in the back of the limousine and placed it on the stretcher. Landis claims that he does not know why he handled things that way, but he did state that he was very, very traumatized because he was behind the limousine when the assassination occurred, and he saw Kennedy's head literally explode. And he said he was haunted by that for years and years afterwards and would have very traumatic dreams. And he did resign from the Secret Service because of that. So again, the bullets don't match the official story of the Warren report. And clearly, the claims of the Warren report are once again proven to be false. Furthermore, I could go on a massive list of witnesses who disprove the Warren Commission, from people who saw a puff of smoke come from behind the fence on the Grassy knoll, which is where James Files claims to have been and when he fired the fatal shot, to many other people. But one very interesting witness is a police officer named Roger Craig. Now, sadly, after Roger Craig gave testimony repeatedly, there were multiple attempts made on his life, which he survived. But eventually, in 1975, he also, just like many other witnesses, was murdered. Roger Craig worked for the Sheriff's Department. He was there. He was not far from Dealey Plaza when he heard the shots ring out. He ran on foot to Dealey Plaza, believed that shots came from the Grassy knoll because he saw other people heading up that way. So he went there and investigated the area himself. He later saw Lee Harvey Oswald leave the book depository and walk right down, basically past him, and get in a station wagon that matched the description of Ruth Payne's station wagon. And Ruth Payne, once again, was the lady who owned the boarding house where Oswald lived. And so that puts her as being involved, even though she claims she wasn't. But he claims that he saw that as well. He also claims that later in the book depository on the 6th floor, when they supposedly found the quote-unquote sniper's nest, he said that there were 3 gun casings lined up perfectly, like laid out on a ledge, and that the rifle that they allegedly found was not the Mannlicher Carcano that they accuse Oswald of killing President Kennedy with. Roger Craig claims that the gun was a German Mauser 7.65 model, which is a completely different gun than a Mannlicher Carcano, which is not a reliable gun in any way. Roger Craig's statements were backed up by documents that were later released by the CIA, where other witnesses claimed that was the gun that was found in the sniper's nest was a German Mauser 7.65. So that's a completely different rifle. Again, disproving that the whole official narrative of Oswald shooting from the 6th floor window with a Mannlicher Carcano is completely false. Again, how did Oswald get down to the 2nd floor break room without breaking a sweat after squeezing off allegedly 3 rounds in a period of time that he could not have possibly even done it? But how would he have gotten down to the 2nd floor when the elevators in the building were not working that day? So he would have had to race down all those flights of stairs without breaking a sweat. There were other ladies on the stairs at that time that never saw him. And he's then supposedly going to get into the break room and be very calm without breaking a sweat. The other 2 gentlemen who were eating lunch with him stated that he was in there with them basically the whole time. When the shots were fired, he would have been in there having his lunch. So clearly, the witness accounts clearly show that Oswald was completely not involved in the assassination whatsoever. Now, we've identified the situation, where it happened, many of the people involved, but why was it done? Why did they want to kill JFK? Now, as far as James Files is concerned, as stated, he had trained men who were involved in the Bay of Pigs, and he resented that Kennedy did not want to go along with the Bay of Pigs. So when asked to be involved in the assassination, he was happy to do it. So that was his motivation. Plus, he said he had great respect for Charles Nicoletti, and he would have done anything Charles Nicoletti asked him to do. But as far as the mafia being involved, why was the mafia involved? And I believe the answer to that is twofold. Number one, I believe the CIA was in bed with the mafia, with organized crime, and they worked with the mafia to pull off the hit. They had wanted to do the hit in Chicago. They were unable to, so they moved it to Dallas. But it's fairly well known that JFK got help winning the election to become president through his dad using the mafia and connections that his father had to get JFK elected. And JFK then basically turned on the mafia and was like, I'm not going to go along with the corruption. And therefore, he turned his back on the mafia, so they wanted him dead. In their minds, he betrayed them. Bobby Kennedy was the attorney general, and he was basically, it seems to me, looking back, that the Kennedys were very patriotic, and they did not want anything to do with the corruption. Also, LBJ, he had a vested interest. Not only was he going to become president if JFK died, but LBJ, in addition to that, would not go to prison because LBJ was involved in a lot of government corruption, and Bobby Kennedy was going after LBJ, and he was going to be prosecuted in 1964. He was going to be kicked off the ticket for re-election in 1964. So he 100% was going to be humiliated, or as he put, embarrassed, as he stated, embarrassed. So he did not want JFK in office. One surefire way to stop your prosecution is to have the president assassinated or go along with the assassination. You become president, shut down the investigation on yourself, which is what he did. So that was his vested interest. But who else would have been involved? James Files has stated that he believed that the people calling the shots went far above LBJ. So that has to mean, LBJ was second in charge, or second most powerful in the most powerful country in the world, the United States. If Kennedy dies, he's the most powerful man in the world. So who could be more powerful than him? Well, if the Illuminati is a real thing, they would certainly have the power much greater than LBJ or JFK or anyone in the world, because they are a conglomerate of very powerful people who are Satanists, who want to rule the entire world. They want to set up the reign of the Antichrist. Now, why would they necessarily want Kennedy dead? Number one, Kennedy did not want to be in Vietnam, and there's a lot of money to be made off of war. The people that have all that money and power that are in allegedly the Illuminati, they benefit from war. So they want war. So if JFK was going to pull everyone from Vietnam and we were never going to be in the Vietnam War, then that would have cost them a lot of money. But there's an even better reason. Number one, Kennedy wanted to do away with the Federal Reserve, and he wanted to print United States notes that were not backed by the Federal Reserve. They had nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. So the Illuminati, who is behind the Federal Reserve and controlling all of the money, would have a vested interest also because of that. However, there was a very peculiar statement that JFK made prior to his death. And that statement was, and I quote, "There exists in this country a plot to enslave every man, woman, and child. And before I leave this high and noble office, I plan to expose that plot." Now, obviously, that plot, he would be speaking of the Illuminati. And he publicly stated that he would expose their plot to enslave all human beings. And he stated that that plot did exist in the United States. Therefore, there were multiple reasons why the powers that be and the people with the money and the evil people who were the real rulers wanted JFK dead. And the trajectory of the entire country changed with his murder. Now, wrapping everything up, I believe there are multiple points I want to highlight. Number one, James Files' story of using a special load, mercury-infused bullet through a Remington fireball is one of the only things that makes sense in regards to the way Kennedy's head exploded on impact. A normal bullet does not do that. I have seen head wounds up close. I've seen suicides up close. I've seen an individual who shot himself with a .357 point blank range to the right side of the head. There was a nasty wound on the right side. There was a much nastier wound on the left side where the bullet exited. Exit wounds are always bigger. But a .357 at that close range did nowhere near the damage that the bullet used in the assassination of JFK did. So it makes perfect sense that that bullet exploded on impact. Also, the gaping head wound at the back was completely doctored up in autopsy photos. There was a massive hole at the back of the head when the head exploded. Furthermore, the individual who initially began investigating James Files was a private investigator named Joe West. Now, after speaking to James Files, West had made a request to exhume the body of JFK to have his skull tested because Files had told him that mercury never goes away. So there will be traces of mercury in JFK's skull from the special load bullet that was used. Joe West then filed the request. It was a 45-page motion to have the body of JFK exhumed, stating that he believed he could prove that there was more than one shooter. And a federal judge blocked it and denied the request about 2 hours after the request was filed. So Joe West files the request, and a federal judge within 2 hours denied it. That is very strange. And not too surprisingly, shortly thereafter, Joe West passed away, and allegedly of a heart condition, but there were also claims that his meds in his own home had been tampered with, so what he took killed him, which kind of fits the bill with the witnesses and the people who tried to expose what had happened to JFK. So when you look back at the entire situation, I mean, there's all this evidence that it could not have possibly been a lone shooter. It could not have possibly been Lee Harvey Oswald. Clearly, there was mafia and CIA involvement. Even Robert Kennedy Jr. has recently stated that 100% Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA operative, and he has also stated that he believes the CIA killed his uncle, who was JFK. But I believe another reason, if you look at the way the world has gone since the assassination of JFK, we have been lied to by our government time and again. Clearly, what people saw that were there and what the video shows proves that the Warren Commission was a complete fraud. But then moving forward, you have multiple other events which many people in the general population who are not kooks question the validity of, such as the moon landings. A lot of people don't trust the government. They believe the government lied. We never landed on the moon. We have people, a lot of people do not believe the, 2000 election scandal in which the government claimed that people had accidentally voted for the wrong candidate, so they had to make all voting electronic instead of paper ballots, which of course, yeah, because when it's electronic, you can manipulate the votes easier and fix elections. Since that time, we have now had 9/11. Most people do not believe the official story of 9/11. They do not believe planes knocked down the buildings. Most people, many people believe that the Twin Towers falling were controlled demolitions, that those were not knocked down by planes hitting the buildings. There is still no legit explanation for how the Twin Towers were hit by planes, but yet Building 7 had to fall later that day. And on that day, they claimed that they made the decision to pull Tower 7. Pull means a controlled demolition. How did they go in and line Building 7 with explosives to pull it after the Twin Towers fell? There was total chaos everywhere. There's no way they could do that. It's impossible. Unless the building was already lined with explosives, and so were the Twin Towers. A lot of people don't believe that the Pentagon was hit by a plane. We've gotten to a place where people do not trust the government. A lot of people do not believe that Barack Obama was ever eligible to be our president, that he never produced a legitimate birth certificate. How can you produce a birth certificate that is clearly a Photoshop document with multiple layers that haven't been saved properly, so you can't remove the layers layer by layer? Okay, how can you elect that person as president when they don't have a birth certificate, when they don't have any proof of any of their claims? All their supposed college records are sealed, but yet they get elected to become president, but there's no proof of anything about them. How do we end up with a presidential election that most people don't even believe is legit at all. And then you see the government completely, just as a communist nation, go after every peaceful protester on January 6th and put them in jail, go after the president who for simply stating that he questioning the results of the election, which there was more than enough legitimate reason to question. But now, the government does what the government wants to do. How do we get to a place where we have a worldwide pandemic that allegedly, supposedly came from someone eating an infected bat? But then it turns out, well, that wasn't ever really even true. And the truth is, the whole virus was created, it began the creation in Chapel Hill, in North Carolina, at Chapel Hill. Then the program in 2015 under Barack Hussein Obama was sent to China with millions and millions of dollars to the labs in Wuhan, China to finish producing the virus, because they couldn't continue producing the virus in the United States because the United States has laws against gain of function testing. Then we get to a place where a so-called vaccine is forced on the whole world. And you have people dropping like flies all over the place that took the vaccine. Terrible deaths, sudden death, cancerous deaths, etc. On and on and on. So we've gotten to a place where anything goes. The government does what it wants to do. The American public does not have freedom. Christians in the workplace do not have any rights. Most companies and hospitals and businesses in general are concerned about and most people don't know about this, but they're concerned about their civil equality index ratings, meaning they want to have a good index rating, and to do that, you have to hire openly homosexuals and lesbians and transvestites and transgenders and everything else, but you can't hire Christians. So companies are actively against hiring Christians, and a lot of places and hospitals will question you in an interview what your religious beliefs are. That's illegal as the day is long, but they all do it. And this is the state of America. This is the place we've come to. And it's only getting worse by the day. We have people in the World Economic Forum who are the Illuminati. That is who makes up these groups. And they want us to be eating bugs. They've destroyed many food processing plants in the United States and abroad. And they want us to be eating bugs, crickets, and other bugs. That's the country that the United States has become. And I listed all of those events in a timeline that all began from the time that JFK was assassinated. We are to a place now where instead of having the great patriotism of JFK, who said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country," to now we have presidents and people in our government condemning America, condemning patriotism, condemning a free country where people have religious liberty, condemning Israel when they're attacked by Muslim terrorists. And these people are in our government now. That's the government that we have now. So clearly, this was the long-term goal of the powers that be that took out JFK. And then they took out RFK a few years later. So to the people who say, well, what's it matter now? Who cares about the JFK assassination? What's it matter? If you want to eat bugs, then I guess it doesn't matter. But it's obvious for anyone with their eyes open and common sense to see what America has become. I want to thank you for tuning in to the podcast. I wouldn't be surprised if this podcast or this episode gets blocked on YouTube, but it will be on Rumble nevertheless. It'll be on both. But I want to thank you for tuning in. And I would like to remind you to please subscribe, like, and share. We will be having some more episodes coming up very shortly, again covering controversial subject matter, but I believe things that are relevant in the day and age in which we live. Again, if you would like to support the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also support the podcast by going to Amazon and purchasing a copy of either or both Nightmare in Holmes County or 225th Street, which are my true spiritual warfare books documenting my experiences in 2 consecutive yet unrelated haunted houses and the spiritual warfare that I had to engage in to survive those environments. Both books are not only highly documented, I have stacks of all kinds of documents to prove what I say in those books. But most importantly, I have the most reliable witness of all also included in the books, which is lots of scripture detailing the weapons of our warfare and how we can have authority over demonic spirits and how we can have victory over them in Jesus' name. Both books are available at Amazon as Kindle books, paperbacks, or audiobooks. Again, thank you for tuning in tonight, and until next time, good night and God bless.